Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on grief. I'm joined here today with Shaina Fawn, LCSW, and founder of Wellbeing in Entertainment and Creative Arts, an emotional wellness platform for people in the entertainment industry. Today, we're going to be talking about grief. Our community lost a beloved board member recently, and we thought it would be a good idea just to have a conversation here together. And we're going to talk about what it looks like, what you can do for whether it's for yourself, for a community member, or a colleague. So welcome, Shaina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is such an important topic and one that we don't talk about enough. And so I'm just really honored that you asked me to be here. So thank you.
You're very welcome. So let's jump in. We're going to talk first about signs of grief. So that you can, it's helpful just so that you can be aware of what's happening, or maybe noticing it in somebody that you know, somebody in your community or family. The first one I thought we talked about. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Shaina.
So, symptoms, right? Symptoms of grief. And I think it's important to start here because this is sort of the red flags that we can see in ourselves or in others that kind of let us know, like, hey, maybe it's time that we take a moment, take some care of ourselves. And so I think the first one is kind of waves of emotion, also referred to as like a grief roller coaster, where you just feel like you're experiencing sort of all of the emotions all at once, or maybe like, you start your day, things are going well, and then all of a sudden your feet kind of fall out from under you. You might tear up unexpectedly, might experience some irritability, lethargy. So just sort of all of the emotions, all of the difficult emotions.
Yeah. And then also it might impact your sleep. One of the big ones is wakefulness. And also it can also make you want to sleep more. You might have trouble getting out of bed in the morning, or wanting extra sleep, or just being exhausted at the end of your day.
Yes. And maybe waking up too at strange times. Maybe every day for like a week, you're waking up at like 3-4 a.m. just wide awake, like, why am I wide awake at this time? It's that's a sign of grief, a symptom of grief.
Yeah, and just to pause and remind everybody that we're talking about the symptoms so that when you recognize them in yourself or others, you can tend to yourself. You can notice it, you can name it. Sometimes that's all we need is just, okay, this is what this is. So, because we can get frightened about it. If you experience anxiety on a regular basis, it can cause increased anxiety. So just knowing like it's normal to be feeling all of these things.
Yes. Yeah. And I think another one is difficulty with routines. So changes in your day-to-day, having difficulty kind of getting started in the morning, or difficulty staying on track or staying focused. So kind of noticing how
I cut you off, but focus is such a good one, isn't it? That is such a telltale sign. Even if it's something that you enjoy to do, like watch your favorite show or, be with a friend, it can be hard to be with them with that lack of focus.
Yeah.
Another one is change in eating habits. That's a big one, maybe eating more than you did, or forgetting to eat, or just not having an appetite at all.
Yes, that's a huge one. Comes up a lot. And I think we were talking earlier about this, but that when we are in grief, we are very vulnerable, right? We're in a very vulnerable state. And so like feeling really vulnerable or on edge with dealing with stress or any kind of changes might be really, really hard to manage as well.
So our tolerance for stress might be lower. Yeah, that's
Yes.
a good one. Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
let's move into maybe things we were talking about, things not to say to people in grief, right?
Mhm.
And just as a reminder to everybody, like we've all said something that maybe wasn't the best thing to say. It's not about being hard on ourselves. It's more about learning what feels good to somebody when they're in grief, or maybe giving ideas of what doesn't feel so good.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And so I think we want to find something to say because we want to support the person that we care
Sure.
about and help them feel better. But there are certain things that can kind of land not as helpful as others. And so one is, at least they're in a better place now, or at
Mhm.
least they're not suffering,
Right.
right?
That's a big one.
Hmm.
That's a
Very, very common.
Or there's a reason for everything, like trying to make sense of something when, especially right at the beginning, it's
Mhm.
just really um, moves the person away from the actual feeling versus lets them just hear that you're with them.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. One that I hear a lot is let them rest in peace. That somehow by grieving or by crying, you're maybe keeping them in this in-between space and not allowing them to be resting in peace or something like that. And that's not helpful. It's we have to allow people to feel the grief and be where they're at. And that doesn't mean that they're not letting their loved one rest in peace. It means that they are a human experiencing the normal reaction to what it means to lose someone that you care about.
Mhm. Beautiful point. Yeah, any statements that are like looking on the bright side, I think is
Mhm.
another kind of group of things to try to avoid saying. Again, it's moving the person away from the actual feeling of grief and putting the attention somewhere else.
Mhm.
And what we know about doing that is it prolongs the grieving experience,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That really what we're meant to be doing is feeling the pain and letting
Yes.
it go through us in a way.
Yes. It's
Mm.
necessary to feel the pain and we started off this conversation, or I started off by saying this is a topic that we're not used to talking about, right?
Right.
And what that does by not talking about it is it makes us feel like there's not space for it, that we need to push it away, we need to shove it down. But that can actually, like you said, prolong the process, make it more difficult. And so I think we really need a kind of cultural shift in our culture at large, and in terms of like, oh, hey, it's okay to take a break. It's okay to tend to yourself. And so maybe when we're talking about helpful statements, supportive statements, kind of maybe some of those are things that we can say, like, it's okay to take time for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
okay to experience your feelings.
Yeah, just letting them know where they are right now is okay versus how they might feel in the future, because we really don't know.
Yeah,
I think sometimes
absolutely.
people say time heals. There's that saying that's time heals all wounds, which I think is very inaccurate
Mm,
and can
mm-mm.
be hurtful, I think.
Mhm. Time can make it maybe easier to carry over time, but
Mhm.
it's always going to be there and it's always going to hurt. It's not, the hurt isn't going to go away necessarily. You might just experience later fewer days in between where it doesn't hurt as much or as often, but it's still going to hurt. There's another interesting analogy that I've heard, that grief is like a rock, and at first it's really, really heavy. It's like a heavy rock in your pocket. But then over time it might not get so heavy, and you might kind of even forget that it's there until you reach into your pocket, maybe looking for some spare change, and oh, there's the rock, and you feel it and it all comes back, right? So you carry this grief with you. I think over time it gets easier, but it's always going to hurt.
Right. Right. And the point is that that rock is always there.
Yes.
Right. It'll always be there. Whether you
Mhm.
forget about it or you come back and maybe feel something about it or recognize that it's there. Perfect.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we've kind of talked about some things there that you can say. Any other ones of helpful things to hear when somebody's in grief or grieving?
I think just, simple ones like I'm here for you, or I'm with you. Or I can be with you in whatever way you need me to be with you. Sort of offering that, like whether it's maybe I need, I can be here in a distraction type of way for you, or I can be here and just sit in silence with you. So just offering like I'm here for you, and I'm here for you how you need me to be. And then I think just some other ones, just like naming, like, this is really hard. This is really painful. This really hurts.
Right.
This isn't easy. Those kinds of statements that just allow someone to know that you are there, you're supportive, and that you understand just the enormity of what just happened, right?
Right. Right. Yeah. And sometimes just, I'm so sorry. Here. I mean, it can be enough to say. I mean, it's just recognizing, just like you said, the enormity of the loss. Just
Yes.
that is important.
Yes.
So let's talk about like what other things we can do, either for ourselves or for others that we know that are grieving, ways to support each other and ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when we talk about this, I want to mention there's an author of a book, Rhoda Stern. She wrote a book called Grief Prints. And it's this idea that grief is a unique process to each of us. It's as unique to us as our fingerprint. So no one in the world has our fingerprint. No one in the world is going to grieve in the same way in which we do, right? But I think just really making sure that we take time to tend to our basic needs first and foremost is really important. When we're grieving, we're very vulnerable. We're a bit disoriented. The world doesn't feel real or right. And so just really trying to just take it back to the basics. Am I getting enough sleep? Am I eating enough? Am I taking enough time for myself, right? Am I tending to my body and my basic needs?
Yeah, that's really good to remember. So the two things I want to underline is everybody grieves in a different way. So there's no one way to do this. And that paying attention to our basic needs, like getting enough rest, hydrating, eating, it's almost like tending to ourselves. I'd read some research where they said our immune system is compromised when we're grieving. So kind of like when you get a cold, you make sure you're drinking enough fluids, you stay warm, you get extra rest so that you can support the body as it heals. And that is something the body is going through a physical experience. Anyone who's experienced grief knows that it's a feeling in the body. And doing those basic self-care tactics are ways to support yourself as you go through this process, which I don't think can be stressed enough. Yeah, and just remembering how debilitating grief can be and that it's not linear, meaning it might jump around. You might feel okay for a few days or weeks, and then you might go through a period of grieving and needing to tend to that grief, or getting tearful, or going back to some of those symptoms we talked at the beginning, feeling irritable. Those can come back in even weeks, months, sometimes years. If it's not tended to, I think it can go on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think really just making sure, to the best of your ability, knowing that we live in a society where we're not very comfortable dealing with this, we're not very comfortable talking about it, just really allowing your grief time and space, the time and space that it deserves. It is a very profound experience, and I think we tend to kind of gloss over it. But what would it look like if we actually made time and space for it in our lives?
Mhm.
And just remembering that, you know, on the other side of grief and the pain is a lot of love and joy. And so by kind of honoring your grief process, you're also honoring the love that you have for this person. And
Absolutely.
it deserves space.
Absolutely. Such a good point. The grief is right. It's not wrong.
Hmm.
It's right. It really is pointing to the love that we had for that person. And this is part of life, is being with that pain. Um, there's that saying, what we resist persists. And I think
Yes.
it's very true with grief, isn't it? Like, if
Yes.
you resist it, it will stick around, and it's not something to scare you or to make you feel a certain way. It's more of just knowing it is how the system works. It wants to move through us. So if we continue to stop or push down or kind of move away from it, um, it's not going anywhere, is it?
And it might honestly lead to bigger problems, like you know, taking, like, using drugs or alcohol, for example, to kind of numb out the feeling.
Right.
And over time that can create a whole other problem, right? If we're reaching to for substances to kind of numb,
Mhm.
and maybe becoming dependent on substances or those kinds of things. So it is much better if we can open up our heart to it and
Mhm.
allow it to be, and know that it doesn't go away fully, but it does get easier over time. It also brings up, I wanted to mention the importance of reaching out for support can
Mm.
be also really, really important, that you don't have to go through this alone. You might want to feel like you might need to be alone at times, and that's okay, but that there are communities of grievers where you can come, and meet with other people who are going through what you're going through. Again, it's not going to be maybe the exact thing that you're going through because you have your own grief print, but
Mhm.
being in community with others is really, really healing and powerful.
Nice. Really important point you're making. And there are grief centers that are around the country, I know, and we're happy to help you here. So anyone who's experiencing grief, feel free. We will help you find a resource. But I think one of the thoughts that came up when you said that was that there are well-meaning friends and family and community members who do not know how to deal with grief or are uncomfortable by it. So it can feel isolating if you're having what they call extended grief. Um, and that just means you might need more support, or there might be an opportunity to be with other people who are grieving, just like you said, so that you
Yes.
can be in that shared experiences. We kind of touched on that a little bit when we talked earlier about that sense of grieving in community, that there are some cultures that kind of build that in, and this is one of the things we're doing here, is we're trying to normalize it, talk about it, so that people know that this is part of the human experience, and you can get through it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely.
And that you're not
Absolutely.
alone.
And also, yeah,
Mhm.
and it's okay, like, it's also okay if you don't want to, like, grieve with your family. I think that's also okay. Like, you might not want to be, you know, around even maybe friends or family. Maybe seeking support from a professional might be more helpful, and that's also okay.
Mhm.
So there's many different routes, but I think just knowing that grief is so isolating, it can feel so isolating, and so putting some of those safety supports in place for yourself so that you're not going through it alone. And
Mhm.
there's many different avenues.
Perfect. I think that's a really good place to end there, because that's exactly though we wanted to have this conversation to give people an idea of what they might be experiencing when they're in grief, and then also to talk about what they can do. So just as a reminder, you can always reach out to us here. And Shaina, thanks so much for taking the time with us today to talk about this really important topic that impacts us all one way or the other.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Always happy to hop on alive and talk with you some more. So thank you, and best wishes to everyone out there who right now I know is really hurting. Um, you will get through it. And yeah, I'm just sending you lots of love and warmth.
Thank you, Shaina. Take care.
Bye-bye.